Hands behind your back before I make this a lot worse for you. Officer Greg Fletcher's handcuffs snapped shut over the sleeves of her uniform with a sharp, final click. He hadn't really looked at her. Not the way he should have. He saw her face. And that was enough. By the time metal met metal around her wrists, all that remained was the illusion of procedure. Vivery Emerson stayed straight. Her expression stayed steady. 14 years of combat deployments had taught her that stillness was its own kind of power. What Officer Fletcher didn't know, he was putting handcuffs on the woman whose next phone call would end his career. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The Georgia heat hit differently when you hadn't been home in 4 years. Vivery Emerson felt it the moment she stepped off the plane in Atlanta. That thick, heavy air that pressed against your skin like a warm hand. She had forgotten about it. Or maybe she had just stopped letting herself remember. She drove the rental car with the windows cracked, watching the city fall away behind her. The tall buildings gave way to stretches of flat road and pine trees. Red clay pushed through the dry grass on both sides of the highway. The sky was huge and pale and cloudless. It looked exactly the same. It always looked exactly the same. "You're about 20 minutes out," Loretta said through the phone's speaker. Her voice was tired. She had been at their mother's house since Tuesday, sorting through boxes, going through drawers, doing the hard, quiet work of clearing out a life. "I've got all the paperwork spread out on the kitchen table. It's a lot, Viv." "I know." Vivery kept her eyes on the road. "I'll be there soon." "You eat anything?" "I'm fine." Loretta made a sound that meant she didn't believe that for 1 second. "You flew straight from Washington, and you haven't eaten. There's leftover rice and beans in the fridge. Don't you dare walk past that kitchen." Despite everything, the funeral 2 weeks ago, the red-eye flight, the dress uniform she was still wearing because there hadn't been time to change, Vivery smiled. Just a small one. She had flown directly from a Pentagon memorial ceremony honoring soldiers killed in Afghanistan. 7 names, 7 folded flags. She had stood at the front of that room in full army dress uniform and kept her face steady, while a room full of generals and senators and civilians cried around her. That was the job. You held it together so others didn't have to. The gold stars on her shoulders caught the afternoon light as she drove. Brigadier General Vivery Elaine Emerson, 36 years old, the youngest brigadier general in Army Special Operations Command history. 14 years of service, 3 combat deployments across 2 theaters of war, 2 presidential unit citations, a record that had made people in Washington sit up straighter when they heard her name. And right now, she was just Vivery. Driving back to Carlton, Georgia, where she grew up poor and black and hungry and determined to settle her mother's estate. She passed her old high school. The paint on the sign was faded. The football field looked smaller than she remembered. Everything looked smaller. Her father's voice came to her without warning, the way it always did when she drove these streets. "They will always see the color first, baby girl. You make them see the uniform second." He had said that to her the morning she left for West Point. He was standing on the porch of this same house she was driving toward, his Gulf War injuries already stealing inches from his posture. He had pressed both hands on her shoulders and looked at her with eyes that held every hope he had ever carried. She had spent 14 years making them see the uniform second. "Viv?" Loretta's voice pulled her back. "Still here." She flicked on her turn signal. "I'm getting gas." "Then I'm coming straight to you." "Okay, drive safe." The gas station sat at the edge of downtown Carlton, the same one that had been there since Vivery was a teenager. She pulled in and parked at the pump, rolled her neck, reached for the door handle. The moment her boots hit the pavement, she noticed a Carlton police cruiser rolling slowly into the lot behind her. She didn't think much of it. She was a decorated United States Army general. She was standing in her home state, in the middle of the afternoon, At a gas station she had been coming to since she was 14 years old. She reached for the gas pump. "Ma'am!" The voice was sharp, commanding, the kind of voice that was used to not being questioned. She turned. Officer Greg Fletcher was walking toward her with the slow, deliberate stride of a man who had decided something before he even got out of the car. He was broad-shouldered, thick in the jaw, with pale eyes that moved over her the way some men's eyes did, like they were measuring, calculating, deciding. His right hand hovered near his holster. Behind her, she heard the second cruiser door open. Another officer, flanking her left. "Step away from the vehicle," Fletcher said. Vivery looked at him, calm, steady, the same way she had looked at hostile territory for 14 years. "Is there a problem, officer?" His eyes moved from her face to the stars on her shoulders and back again. They didn't soften. "Step away from the vehicle," he said again. "Now." Vivery didn't move. Not because she was afraid. Not because she didn't know what was happening. She didn't move because she had learned a long time ago that stillness was power. Panic was what they wanted. Panic gave them a reason. She stood her ground and kept her voice even. "I'm Brigadier General Vivery Elaine Emerson," she said. "United States Army." She pointed to the stars on her left shoulder. Slowly, deliberately, making sure he saw them. "I'm getting gas. That's all." Officer Fletcher stopped walking about 6 feet away from her. He looked at the stars. Then he looked back at her face. His expression didn't change by a single degree. "I don't care if you're the Queen of England," he said. "I need to see your hands, both of them, right now." Something cold moved through Vivery's chest. Not fear, recognition. She had been here before. Not at this gas station, not in this uniform, but in this exact moment. This specific kind of moment that black people in America knew in their bones. The moment where no amount of credentials, no amount of rank, no amount of doing everything right mattered one bit. Behind her, she heard the second officer's footsteps on the pavement, circling around the back of her rental car, cutting off her left side. She raised both hands slowly, palms out, fingers spread. The phone in her jacket pocket was still connected to Loretta. She had not hung up. She could only hope her sister was listening. "There you go," Fletcher said, like she was a child who had finally learned to sit still. He stepped closer. "We got a call about a vehicle matching this description, connected to a string of break-ins in the area." Vivery looked at him steadily. "This is a rental car. I picked it up at Atlanta Hartsfield 3 hours ago." "I'm sure you did." "The description of a suspect vehicle and the description of this vehicle are not the same thing, officer." Something flickered across Fletcher's face. Not embarrassment, annoyance, the particular annoyance of a man who did not like being corrected. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stop talking and let me do my job." "You don't have grounds." "I said, stop talking." His voice cracked like a whip, loud enough that the few people near the other pumps turned to look. A woman with a young child took a small step backward. An older man in a hardware store shirt froze with his hand on his truck door. And then there was Mario Lambert, 19 years old, filling up his older sister's car 2 pumps over, who watched this scene for exactly 3 seconds before he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Quietly, calmly. He pressed record and held it at his side where it could see everything. Fletcher moved toward Vivery with his handcuffs already in his hand. "You're being detained for questioning," he said. "On what grounds?" Her voice was still steady, controlled, but her hands remained up. She knew better than to lower them. "Suspicion of involvement in a pattern of vehicle-related crimes in this area?" "I am a brigadier general in the United States Army," Vivery said, each word precise and separate. "I landed in Atlanta 3 hours ago. I have never been to Carlton as an adult without being in service. I am wearing my uniform. I have my military ID in my left breast pocket, and I will show it to you right now, if you give me the word." Fletcher smiled. It was not a kind smile. "What you're going to do," he said quietly, "is put your hands behind your back." The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. The cold metal pressed against the fabric of her uniform sleeves, right beneath her stars. The crowd around the pumps had grown without anyone seeming to move closer. They stood like statues, barely breathing. Mario Lambert's phone was steady in his hand, capturing every second. Loretta's voice, tiny and frantic through the jacket pocket, said, "Viv? Viv, what is happening?" Fletcher's hand pressed against her shoulder, steering her toward the cruiser. She walked without resistance, head up, back straight, the way she had walked into every hard room for 14 years. But as the cruiser door swung open in front of her, something cracked open deep in her chest. Not her composure. Something underneath it. Her father's voice again. "Make them see the uniform, baby girl." They had seen it. They just didn't care. The back of the police cruiser smelled like vinyl and old coffee. Vivary sat with her hands cuffed behind her back, and her spine straight and her eyes forward. The seat was hard. The partition between her and the front of the car was smudged with fingerprints. The radio crackled with voices she didn't listen to. She breathed slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The same breathing she used in combat when everything around her was falling apart, and she needed her mind to stay sharp. Think, Vivary. Think. Fletcher was in the driver's seat, filling out something on his dashboard tablet, occasionally glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Lever had stayed at the gas station, presumably to speak with any witnesses, or maybe to make sure they didn't say too much. "You get one call," Fletcher said without looking up. "You want it or not?" "Yes." He reached back and handed her the phone through the partition slot, uncuffing her hands just long enough to take it. Then the cuffs clicked shut again, in front of her this time. She looked at the phone in her hands. Fletcher expected her to call a lawyer. Maybe Loretta. Maybe someone who would cry and beg, and ask the officer very nicely to please reconsider. Vivary dialed a number she had memorized 4 years ago and had never once needed to use. It rang twice. Jackson. Major General Sebastian Jackson's voice was exactly what it always was. Low, steady, like gravel packed tight under concrete. He was 67 years old. He had served in 2 wars. He had personally championed Vivary's promotion to brigadier general and had called it the single best decision the Army had made in a decade. Sebastian. She kept her voice completely calm. "It's Vivary Emerson. I'm sitting in the back of a Carlton, Georgia police cruiser in full-dress uniform. I was arrested at a gas station on a pretextual stop. I need you to make some noise." 3 seconds of silence. 3 full seconds. She counted them. "I'll call you back in 4 minutes, Jackson said. He called back in 3. What happened next moved fast. The way things moved when the right people made the right calls. Vivary couldn't see it from the back of the cruiser, but she could hear it, and she could feel it. The way you feel a shift in the weather before the rain actually falls. The desk sergeant's phone rang. The sound carried through the open station door. A pause. Then a voice, high and uncertain, saying, "Yes, sir. Yes, I understand, sir." Then Chief Joey Melvins's personal cell phone rang. She could hear the muffled sound of it from the front lot, where Melvins had materialized, apparently summoned by the desk sergeant's stricken face. Then the station's main office line lit up. Fletcher's radio crackled. Someone said his name in a tone that wasn't a question. She watched his shoulders tighten in the front seat. He got out of the car without a word. She sat and waited. Through the cruiser window, she could see the desk sergeant speaking rapidly to Fletcher in the parking lot. Fletcher's jaw was set. He shook his head once, then stopped shaking it. Whatever the desk sergeant said next landed like a stone in still water. Fletcher came back and opened the rear door. He uncuffed her without speaking. He didn't meet her eyes. She stepped out, smoothed the front of her uniform, rolled her shoulders back. She was handed her belongings in a plastic bag. Her phone, her military ID, her keys. Chief Joey Melvins appeared in the station doorway. He was a big man, gone soft around the middle, with silver hair and the practiced smile of someone who had spent decades making problems disappear. He walked toward her with his hand already extended, like they were meeting at a fundraiser. "General Emerson," he said warmly. "There's clearly been a terrible misunderstanding. On behalf of the Carlton Police Department, I want to assure you—" Vivery looked at his outstretched hand. She looked at it for a long, quiet moment, long enough for it to mean something. Then she looked up at his face, and she walked past him without a word. Loretta was in the parking lot. She had driven straight there, 20 minutes in 19. Her eyes were red, and her fists were clenched at her sides, and she looked like she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. The sisters reached each other and held on. Behind Vivery, she heard Melvins clear his throat and walk back inside. She didn't turn around. But over Loretta's shoulder, through the window of the station, she could see Fletcher standing at the desk, watching her leave. His expression wasn't sorry. It was furious, and that told her everything she needed to know about what was coming next. The drive to their mother's house took 12 minutes. Neither sister spoke for most of it. Loretta kept both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road. Vivery sat in the passenger seat with her uniform still perfectly pressed, her face turned toward the window, watching Carlton pass by outside the glass. The same streets, the same houses, the same town that had watched her leave at 18 and never expected her to amount to much. She had come back to bury her mother. Instead, she had spent her first afternoon here in the back of a police cruiser. "You okay?" Loretta finally asked. "I'm fine." "Viv." "I said I'm fine, Loretta." Loretta didn't push. She knew her sister well enough to know that fine didn't mean what it meant when other people said it. With Vivery, fine meant she was processing, calculating, storing everything away in neat, ordered rows where she could access it later when she needed it. They pulled into the driveway of their mother's small blue house on Delaney Street. The flower boxes on the porch were still there, though the flowers had gone dry and brittle in the summer heat. Nobody had watered them since. Inside, the kitchen table was covered in paperwork, estate documents, bank statements, utility bills, the ordinary debris of a life. Loretta had set up her laptop at one end of the table to keep track of everything. By the time they walked through the door, Mario Lambert's video had 200,000 views. Loretta saw it first. She had her phone in her hand, and she stopped walking in the middle of the kitchen and just stared at the screen. The footage was steady and clear. You could see everything. You could see Vivery's stars. You could see Fletcher's face. You could see the handcuffs going on. "Viv," Loretta said quietly. "Look." Vivery looked. She watched the whole thing without a word. 47 seconds of her life that the entire country was now watching on a loop. By midnight, the video had 4 million views. News alerts were firing on both their phones every few minutes. Vivery's name was trending. Her rank was trending. The words, Carlton, Georgia, were trending. She turned her phone face down and went to bed. By morning, it was the lead story on every major network. Loretta had the news playing on the small television above the kitchen counter while she made coffee, and Vivery stood in the doorway in yesterday's uniform. She had nothing else to change into yet. Her bag hadn't arrived from the airport, and watched a news anchor describe the footage over a still image of her in handcuffs. 36 years old, youngest brigadier general in Special Operations Command history. Arrested at a gas station in her hometown. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down. The press conference was at 10 o'clock. Chief Joey Melvins stood behind a podium on the front steps of the Carlton Police Department in a freshly pressed uniform. The department's seal was on a banner behind him. 2 officers flanked him on either side like bookends. Loretta pulled it up on her laptop. They watched it together. Melvins smiled at the cameras like a man who had done this many times before. "My officers responded to a call and followed standard protocol," he said. The situation was resolved appropriately through proper channels. The Carleton Police Department stands fully behind Officer Fletcher, who is a decorated officer with an exemplary record of service to this community. A reporter called out from the crowd, "Chief Melvins, will Officer Fletcher be suspended pending an investigation?" "There is nothing to investigate," Melvins said smoothly. "Our officers acted within their authority. The individual involved was uncooperative, and the situation was unfortunately escalated as a result." Uncooperative? The word landed in the kitchen like something thrown. Loretta's coffee cup hit the table harder than she intended. Uncooperative? She was standing at a gas pump with her stars on her shoulders, and he put her in handcuffs. That's what he calls uncooperative? On the screen, Melvins was already turning away from the podium, smiling, nodding to his officers. The press conference was over in less than 4 minutes. Vivori watched it all without moving. When it ended, she reached over and closed the laptop with one hand. The screen went dark. The kitchen was quiet. "He just made this much bigger than himself," she said. Loretta stared at her. "What are you going to do?" Vivori wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. Outside the window, the dry Georgia morning stretched on, bright and indifferent. Her mother's empty flower boxes sat on the porch. "First," she said, "I'm going to need a change of clothes." The morning after Melvin's press conference, the phone didn't stop. Vivori had borrowed a pair of Loretta's jeans and an old sweatshirt, and was sitting at the kitchen table with a pen and a legal pad, making notes. News requests, interview requests, a message from a civil rights attorney in Atlanta. 2 messages from former soldiers she had served with, checking in. 1 message from a Pentagon number she didn't recognize. She answered none of them. Loretta was at the counter, refilling her coffee for the 3rd time, when her own phone rang. She looked at the screen. A number she didn't know. She almost let it go to voicemail. "Hello?" A man's voice, calm and professional. He introduced himself as a journalist with a Georgia-based investigative news outlet. He said he had been following the story since the video dropped. He said he had something she needed to see. Loretta pressed the phone tighter against her ear. "What kind of something?" "A document," he said. "An internal police report. Filed 8 years ago. I think your sister needs to know about it." Loretta looked across the table at Vivori, who had stopped writing and was watching her with steady eyes. "Send it," Loretta said. It came through as an email attachment while they were still on the phone. Loretta opened it on her laptop and turned the screen toward Vivori without a word. It was a formal complaint, filed in 2016 with the Carleton Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. The complainant's name was Robin Harold, 71 years old, United States Army veteran. The complaint described a traffic stop in which Officer Greg Fletcher had pulled Robin over on a residential street, accused him of matching the description of a suspect, sound familiar, and when Robin questioned the stop, Fletcher had grabbed him by the arm and shoved him against the hood of his own car hard enough to bruise 3 ribs. Robin had photographs. He had witness names. He had filed everything correctly. He had done everything right. At the bottom of the document was a single stamped notation in red ink. Complaint reviewed. Insufficient evidence. Case closed. The stamp was signed by Chief Joey Melvins. Vivori read the document once. Then she read it again. Her coffee sat untouched and cooling beside the legal pad. The journalist was still on the line. Loretta put him on speaker. "How did you get this?" Vivori asked. "Public records request," he said. "Filed 6 months ago for unrelated reasons. It was in a batch of documents the department released. I don't think they realized it was in there." A pause. "Mr. Harold is still alive. He lives in Mercy County, about 20 minutes from where you're sitting." The kitchen was very quiet. Vivori set the document down flat on the table. She aligned it carefully with the edge of the legal pad, the way she arranged things when she needed her hands to do something while her mind worked through something bigger. She had walked out of that police station yesterday thinking this was about her, about what they had done to her specifically, her rank, her record, her uniform, her name. But it wasn't about her. It had never been about her. Fletcher had done this before. He had done it to a 71-year-old veteran who had no stars on his shoulders and no Pentagon contacts in his phone. He had done it, and Melvin's had buried it, and life in Carlton had continued on exactly as before. She thought about Robin Harold filing that complaint, filling out the forms, gathering his photographs, writing down the witness names, doing everything the right way, the honest way, the way you were supposed to, and then waiting, and then being told, in the language of a rubber stamp, that it didn't matter. 8 years of silence. "This isn't just about me," Vivery said quietly. Loretta had been watching her sister's face the whole time. She recognized the shift. She had seen it once before. When Vivery was 17 years old, and everyone in Carlton told her that West Point wasn't for girls like her from places like this. That same expression, the one that meant a decision had already been made somewhere deep and quiet inside her, and what you were seeing on the surface was just the world catching up. Vivery picked up her own phone. "I need Robin Harold's number," she said. The journalist gave it to her without hesitation. She wrote it on the legal pad, underlined it once. Then she looked up at Loretta with eyes that were clear and certain and completely, dangerously calm. "Find me a box," she said. "We're going to need to carry some things." Robin Harold lived on a narrow street called Pickers Lane, in a small white house with a concrete porch and the American flag mounted beside the front door. Vivery pulled up in Loretta's car that same afternoon. She sat for a moment before getting out, looking at the house. The lawn was cut short and even. The porch was swept clean. The flag was straight. These were the details of a man who still believed in order, who still believed in doing things the right way, even after the right way had failed him. She got out of the car, carrying the empty banker's box Loretta had found in the closet. Before she could knock, the door opened. Robin Harold was a tall man who had shrunk some with age, the way tall men do. He had close-cropped white hair and deep-set eyes that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by most of it. He was wearing a pressed button-down shirt, like he had known she was coming and had decided to be ready. He looked at her for a long moment. "I've been watching the news," he said. His voice was slow and deliberate, like someone who chose every word on purpose. "Figured someone might come around eventually." He stepped back from the door. "Come on in." The living room was small and immaculate. A worn sofa, a wooden side table, photographs on the wall, a young Robin in military uniform, a woman Vivery guessed was his wife, children and grandchildren arranged in Christmas portraits. On the mantel, a folded flag in a glass case. Beside it, a single medal on a ribbon. His father's, she realized. Korea. Robin lowered himself carefully into the armchair across from her. His hands rested on his knees. Large hands, steadied despite the slight tremor she noticed when he first reached for the door. "You read the complaint," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did." "Then you know what happened." "I'd like to hear it from you," Vivery said. "If you're willing." He was quiet for a moment. Then he began. He had been driving home from his daughter's house on a Tuesday evening in October 2016. A routine drive he had made 100 times. Fletcher's cruiser had pulled in behind him 2 blocks from his own house. No warning, no siren, just lights. Fletcher told him he matched the description of a suspect. Robin had asked, calmly and politely, what suspect and what description. Fletcher hadn't answered the question. He had told Robin to get out of the car. Robin had gotten out of the car. "I knew better than to argue," Robin said. There was no bitterness in his voice, just the flat, tired truth of a man who had lived long enough to know the rules of the game, even when the game was rigged. "I was 63 years old. I told him I was a veteran, showed him my ID, told him my daughter lived 2 streets over, and my name was on the deed of the house we were standing in front of. Fletcher had grabbed him by the arm anyway, told him to stop resisting. Robin hadn't been resisting. He had been standing still with his hands visible, and Fletcher had shoved him against the hood of his own car so hard that Robin had felt something give in his left side. 3 cracked ribs. Robin had driven himself to the hospital the following morning because he hadn't wanted to call an ambulance and cause more trouble. "I filed the complaint the next week," he said. "Took me photographs of the bruising. Wrote down the names of 2 neighbors who saw the whole thing from their porch. Filled out every form they gave me." He paused. Never heard a word back. Not for 4 months. Then a letter came. Said the complaint had been reviewed and there was insufficient evidence. He almost smiled. Insufficient. I had photographs. I had witnesses. I had hospital records. He reached beside his chair and lifted a banker's box onto his lap. It was full, organized into labeled folders with careful handwriting. "I stopped expecting justice a long time ago," he said, holding the box out to her. "But I never stopped keeping the paperwork." Vivori took the box from his hands. She felt the weight of it, not just the paper and the folders, but everything they represented. 8 years of a man waiting for someone to finally care enough to show up. She stood up. Robin walked her to the door. On the porch, he looked at the stars on her shoulder. She had changed back into her uniform before driving over, and something moved across his face that she couldn't quite name. She could guess, though. He had never seen stars on a uniform that looked like his own face before. "I'll be in touch, Mr. Harold," she said. She carried his box to the car and didn't look back, but she made him a promise anyway. Not out loud, not in words. She made it the same way she had promised herself she was getting into West Point at 18 years old, standing in a kitchen not much different from his, in a town that didn't believe in her yet. She made it in the quiet place where she kept the things she never broke. Vivori got back to the house as the sun was going down. Loretta had made dinner. Rice and beans. The same thing she always made when she didn't know what else to do with her hands. The smell of it filled the small kitchen and made the house feel, just for a moment, like it used to feel when their mother was still in it. They ate without much talking. Robin's banker's box sat on the counter beside the stove, the labeled folders visible through the open lid. Every few minutes, Loretta glanced at it like it might say something. After dinner, Vivori cleared the table, stacked the plates, and opened the box. She worked for 2 hours, spreading documents across the table in chronological order, cross-referencing Robin's witness names against the official complaint record, reading the Internal Affairs response letter 3 times, each time finding new things to be angry about. She made notes in the margins of her legal pad in small, tight handwriting. Loretta fell asleep on the couch, with the television on low. At 9:15, Vivori picked up her phone. She had a name in her head that had been sitting there since that morning, since the moment she read Robin's complaint and understood that this was bigger than one arrest and one bad officer. She had crossed paths with this person twice at Pentagon functions, briefly, formally, but the impression had stayed with her. Senator Leslie Harwood, Georgia's junior senator, former civil rights attorney out of Savannah, 61 years old, sharp as broken glass, and twice as dangerous to the people who underestimated her. Vivori didn't have her direct number, but she had the number of a retired colonel named Aiden Sayers, who moved in the same Washington circles and knew everybody worth knowing. She called him first. "Aiden, I need a favor." "Already saw the video," he said before she could explain. "Half of Washington has. Give me 10 minutes. He called back in 8. He had Harwood's personal cell number and a message. The senator has been waiting for someone to call. Vivori dialed. It rang once. This is Harwood. Her voice was exactly what Vivori expected. Precise, unhurried, and carrying the particular authority of a woman who had spent decades in rooms that didn't originally have a seat for her. "Senator, this is Brigadier General Vivori Emerson. I apologize for the hour." "Don't. A pause, brief and purposeful. "I've been watching that footage since yesterday morning. I've watched it 11 times. I want to know what you need." Vivary appreciated that. No performance, no political warm-up, just the question that mattered. She talked for 20 minutes without stopping. She told Harwood about Robin Harold, about the banker's box, about the buried complaint and the rubber stamp and 8 years of silence, about Melvins's press conference and the word uncooperative hanging in the air like something rotten, about Fletcher's face in the rearview mirror. Not sorry, not embarrassed, furious. Harwood listened without interrupting. That was rarer than people knew. When Vivary finished, the senator was quiet for a moment. "I've been building toward a subcommittee hearing on law enforcement accountability for 14 months, Harwood said. "I have data. I have statistics. I have reports from advocacy organizations." Another pause. "What I have not had is the right case, the right moment, the right person standing at the center of it, with evidence that cannot be dismissed and a record that cannot be attacked." Her voice shifted. Not softer exactly, but more direct. "Do you understand what I'm telling you, General? You needed a standard-bearer," Vivary said. "I needed someone they couldn't make disappear." A beat. They arrested the wrong woman. Something moved through Vivary's chest, warm and hard at the same time. "They always arrest the wrong woman," she said. "That's the point." Harwood almost laughed. It was a short sound, but it was real. "I want Robin Harold in that hearing room. I want his documents. I want his witness names. And I want you sitting beside him in that uniform." Her tone shifted back to business. "My office will handle the subpoena process. Can you be in Washington by end of week?" "Yes." "Good." Another pause. "Get some sleep, General. We have work to do." The call ended at 10:17. Vivary set the phone on the table. She looked at the documents spread out in front of her. Robin's careful handwriting on the folder labels. 8 years of a good man's patience laid out in neat rows under the kitchen light. She picked up her pen. In the margin of her legal pad, she wrote 2 words and underlined them twice. Federal angle. Then she circled them. Then she got back to work. 2 days after Melvins's press conference, Vivary was at the kitchen table when Loretta's phone rang. It was the school principal. Loretta took the call in the hallway, keeping her voice low. Vivary couldn't hear the words, but she could hear the tone. Careful, measured, the way you spoke to someone who had power over your paycheck. The call lasted 4 minutes. When Loretta came back into the kitchen, her face was arranged into the careful, neutral expression she used when she didn't want her sister to see how upset she was. Vivary had grown up with that face. She knew exactly what it meant. "What did he say?" Loretta sat down. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "He said there have been some concerns from parents about my social media activity." She paused. "He said it might be better if I stepped back from, and I'm quoting, making public statements about ongoing legal matters." The kitchen was very quiet. "He said that," Vivary said, word for word. Vivary pushed her legal pad across the table. "Write it down. Everything he said. Every word. In the order he said it." She kept her voice steady. "Don't leave anything out." While Loretta wrote, Vivary's phone buzzed. A news alert. She tapped it open. A conservative media outlet, one of the loud ones, the kind that treated outrage like a business model, had run a segment about her. She read the headline twice. Then she read the article. It questioned whether her promotion to brigadier general at 35 had been merit-based or the result of what they called diversity pressures within the modern military. It suggested she was using the arrest as a platform to build a public profile ahead of what they implied might be political ambitions. It quoted an unnamed source describing her as difficult and self-promoting. It used the word ambitious 4 times. In that particular kind of writing, she knew, ambitious didn't mean the same thing when it was aimed at a black woman as it did when it was aimed at anyone else. She put the phone down. Across town, at that same moment, Chief Joey Melvins was sitting across a wide desk from Mayor Dominic Perkins in Carlton City Hall. Perkins was 58, soft-spoken, and deeply committed to doing whatever kept his life the easiest. He had held this office for 2 terms on the strength of Melvins's political connections and had no particular desire to find out what happened without them. Melvins was not soft-spoken. "This woman is coming after this department," Melvins said. He kept his voice controlled, but just barely. "She went on television. She's talking to journalists. I've heard she's making calls to Washington." He leaned forward. "Dominic, if you don't get in front of this, it stops being her problem and starts being yours." Perkins shifted in his chair. "What do you want me to do, Ray?" "Go on the news. Tonight. Say what needs to be said. That this department followed procedure. That outside political pressure is not going to dictate how we do our jobs in this city." Melvins sat back. "Make it clear that this is being driven by outside agitators who don't care about Carlton." That afternoon, Mayor Dominic Perkins stood at a podium in front of City Hall and delivered exactly that statement. Word for word, almost. He called the growing national attention around Vivary's arrest politically motivated interference. He praised the Carlton Police Department's long record of community service. He did not say Vivary's name. He did not have to. By 6 o'clock, the segment attacking Vivary's promotion was being shared hundreds of thousands of times online. By 7, Loretta's post defending her sister had been reported and removed from one platform for reasons neither of them could fully understand. Vivori sat with all of it. The principal's call, the article, Perkins's statement, the removed post. She sat with it the way she had learned to sit with bad intelligence in the field, not reacting to any individual piece, but turning all of it over in her hands until she could see the shape of what she was actually dealing with. This was coordinated. Melvins wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was running a campaign. She added Loretta's notes to the legal pad. She clipped the article printout to the growing stack of documents on the table. She wrote a note beside Perkins's name with the time and date of his statement. Every threat, every attack, every attempt to make her smaller or quieter or easier to dismiss. She was keeping all of it. Because, in her experience, the people who came at you hardest always left the most evidence behind. The call came the following morning at 7:45. Vivori was standing at the kitchen counter with her first cup of coffee, still in her borrowed sweatshirt, watching the early light come through the window above the sink. The backyard was small and overgrown. Her mother's old garden had gone to weeds. She looked at the screen. The number was a Pentagon extension, not Jackson's, a different one. She set her coffee down and answered. "General Emerson." The voice was measured, professional, the kind of careful that took years to perfect. "This is General Mossfield. I serve as liaison between the Department of Defense and the Public Affairs Division. I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all, sir." "Good." A pause that wasn't quite long enough to be awkward, but almost was. "I'll be direct with you, because I think you're someone who appreciates directness." "I am," she said. "The Army is monitoring this situation with significant concern." Another pause. "You have an extraordinary record, General. The kind of record that gets noticed. That kind of visibility is an asset in many circumstances." He let that sit for a moment. "It also means that your conduct, public conduct specifically, is held to a higher standard than most." Vivori said nothing. She understood the architecture of what he was building. She let him build it. There is a perspective, held by some, that an active duty officer engaging in a very public dispute with civilian law enforcement creates certain optics that are, let's say, inconsistent with the Army's apolitical posture. His voice was smooth and unhurried. "I want to be clear that I am not ordering you to do anything. I simply want to ensure you have the full picture." "What picture is that, General?" "Your record-breaking promotion at 35 drew attention. He said it carefully, like he was placing something fragile on a table. There are individuals on the review board who were watching your next steps before any of this happened. Now they are watching more closely. A beat. The perception that you are leveraging your rank to pursue a personal grievance, whether or not that perception is accurate, could have lasting consequences on your file. The backyard outside the window was perfectly still. Not even the weeds were moving. "Are you telling me to stand down, General Mossfield?" "I'm telling you to be thoughtful," he said. "There's a difference." There wasn't much of one, but she let that go, too. "I appreciate your candor, sir," she said. "Of course." His voice warmed by exactly 1 degree. "The Army values your service enormously, General. We want to see you continue it at the highest levels. I'm sure you understand." "Completely," she said. "Good." He sounded like a man who believed the problem was solved. "Have a good morning." She set the phone on the counter. She stood there for a moment with her hand resting on it. Outside, a bird landed on the fence post at the edge of the yard and sat there looking at nothing in particular. She picked the phone back up and called Jackson. He answered on the second ring. "I was expecting this call," he said. "Mossfield just got off the phone with me." "I know." He didn't pretend otherwise. That was one of the things she trusted about him. "He has allies on the review board, Vivery. 3 of them, at least. Men who thought your promotion moved too fast." A pause. "I will do everything I can from my position. But I need you to understand what you are potentially walking toward." She looked at the photograph of her father on the mantel in the next room. She could see it through the kitchen doorway. The same photograph that had been in that spot since she was 12 years old. He was in his Gulf War uniform. Young, straight-backed, proud. He had come home from that war and been stopped by police in this same town 3 times in the first year. Not once had anyone apologized. "I understood the risks at 18, Sebastian," she said. "I'm still here." Jackson was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, something in his voice had shifted. Not softer, older. "I know you are." Another pause. "Watch yourself out there." "Always do." She hung up and stood at the counter for 1 more minute. Just 1. She gave herself that much. Then she picked up her pen, walked back to the kitchen table, and opened Robin's banker's box. She had work to do, and a review board's opinion of her, she had decided somewhere in the space between Mossfield's careful words and the sight of her father's photograph, was not going to be the thing that stopped her. Nothing had managed it yet. They drove to Washington 4 days later. Vivery drove. Robin sat in the passenger seat with his banker's box on his lap the entire way, like he didn't trust it in the trunk. He didn't say much for the first 2 hours. He watched the landscape change out the window. Georgia pine giving way to Carolina flatland, flatland giving way to Virginia hills, and occasionally reached down to check that the box lid was still closed. Loretta had stayed in Carlton. Someone needed to keep an eye on things there. She had hugged Vivery at the door that morning, long and tight, and hadn't said anything because there wasn't anything left to say. They arrived in Washington the evening before the hearing. Senator Harwood's office had arranged a hotel 2 blocks from the Capitol building. Small rooms, clean and quiet. Vivery sat at the desk in her room that night, with Robin's documents spread out in front of her, going over everything one final time. She had her own written testimony prepared, 2 pages, single-spaced, every word chosen with surgical precision. She didn't sleep much. In the morning, she put on her uniform. The hearing room was wood-paneled and high-ceilinged, with long tables arranged in a U-shape, and a raised platform at the front, where the subcommittee members sat. There were cameras along both walls, public gallery seats along the back. The room was already half full when Vivery and Robin walked in, and she felt the shift in the air the moment they appeared. That particular stillness that happens when a room full of people all notice the same thing at the same time. Senator Harwood met them at the door. She was taller than Vivery expected, with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She shook Robin's hand with both of hers and held it for a moment. "Thank you for being here, Mr. Harold," she said quietly. "I mean that." Robin nodded. He was wearing his suit. His father's Korea service medal was pinned to the lapel. They took their seats at the witness table. Robin testified first. He spoke slowly, the way he did everything, with deliberate care, choosing each word like he was laying bricks. He described the October evening in 2016. The lights in his rearview mirror 2 blocks from his own house, Fletcher's voice, the instruction to get out of the car. He described showing his ID, identifying himself as a veteran, standing with his hands visible. He described the moment Fletcher grabbed his arm. "I didn't fall," Robin said. "I want to be clear about that. He shoved me against that hood hard enough that I felt my ribs go, and I didn't fall, because I knew that if I fell, it would be worse." The room was completely silent. He described filing the complaint, gathering the photographs, writing down the witness names, waiting 4 months, getting the letter. "Insufficient evidence," he said. "That's what they told me. Insufficient." He looked up at the senators on the raised platform. "I had photographs of the bruising. I had 2 witnesses who watched the whole thing from their porch. I had hospital records." He paused. "What I didn't have was anybody who thought I was worth listening to." Several senators looked away. Then Vivery spoke. She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to. She laid out the timeline with the precision of a military briefing. The pretext stop, the arrest, the Pentagon calls, Melvins's press conference, Robin's buried complaint, the documented pattern. She told the subcommittee that what happened to her on a Georgia roadside was not a mistake or an overreaction. It was a system doing exactly what it had been built to do. "If this can happen to me, in this uniform, with these stars, in broad daylight with witnesses present, then it has been happening to people without this uniform every single day," she said. "The only difference is that nobody recorded those." The room stayed silent for a full 3 seconds after she finished. Then every camera in the room flashed at once. By evening, Fletcher had been placed on paid administrative leave. 2 Carlton City Council members issued statements calling for an independent departmental review. The testimony had been watched over 2 million times before midnight. Vivery and Robin ate dinner at a quiet restaurant near the hotel. Robin ordered the catfish. He ate slowly and deliberately and didn't say much. But when the check came, he looked across the table at her with those deep-set eyes that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by most of it. Tonight, though, he looked surprised. "Didn't think I'd live to see this day," he said. Vivery looked at him. "It's not over yet, Mr. Harold." He almost smiled. "No," he said. "But it started." That night, back at the hotel, Vivery sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet of her room and let herself feel, just briefly, just for a moment, something that was close to hope. Her phone rang. It was Harwood's chief of staff. His name was Jeremy Morrison. Vivery had met him briefly in the hallway outside the hearing room that morning. Young, organized, the kind of person who carried 3 pens because he didn't trust any single one. His voice now was the carefully controlled voice of someone delivering bad news to someone they respected. "General Emerson, I need to walk you through some things." She stood up from the bed. "Go ahead. 3 things have happened in the last 2 hours. I want to give them to you straight. Do that. First." He drew a breath. "Chief Melvins has filed a civil lawsuit against you. Defamation. His attorney is claiming that your characterization of the Carlton Police Department as systematically corrupt during today's testimony constitutes deliberate reputational damage." A pause. "His attorney is already on television. He's calling you, and I'm reading directly here, a politically ambitious young officer who has declared war on a small-town police department to accelerate her own career." Vivery walked to the window. The Capitol building was lit up against the dark sky, white and enormous and indifferent. Second, Jeremy continued, someone has leaked an edited version of Mario Lambert's video to a national outlet. The edited version removes the portion where you identify your rank and credentials. It begins after that point. Viewers are seeing footage of the arrest without the context of your identifying yourself. Another pause. It's moving faster than our corrections. Significantly faster. She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose. Third. His voice tightened slightly. Just slightly. General Mossfield has been in contact with the review board. As of this evening, a formal conduct review has been opened regarding your public commentary on an ongoing civilian law enforcement matter. He stopped. The flag on your file is real, General. It's been entered. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, Washington went about its nighttime business. Cars moving, lights changing, the enormous, indifferent machinery of power turning and turning. Vivery stood at the window for a long moment. She thought about the hearing room that morning. Robin's voice describing the moment Fletcher shoved him against the hood of his car. I didn't fall. I knew that if I fell, it would be worse. She thought about the 2 million views by midnight. She thought about the look on Robin's face across the dinner table. Didn't think I'd live to see this day. She thought about her file. 14 years of spotless, record-breaking service. The first flag it had ever carried. Thank you, Jeremy, she said. I'll be in touch with the senator in the morning. She ended the call. She stood at the window for another minute. Just standing. Not thinking, not planning. Just letting the weight of it settle the way it needed to settle before she could pick it back up and carry it properly. Then she called Loretta. Loretta answered before the second ring. It was past 10 o'clock, and she had clearly been awake, waiting. I saw the edited video, she said immediately. It's everywhere, Viv. People who didn't watch the hearing are only seeing that version, and they're... She stopped. How bad is it? It's bad. How bad? Vivery told her. All 3 things. She laid them out the same way Jeremy had. Straight and in order, without softening any of it. When she finished, Loretta was quiet long enough that Vivery checked the phone to make sure the call was still connected. Come home, Loretta said finally. Come back to Carlton tonight. Vivery drove back through the darkness. Robin slept in the passenger seat with his banker's box still on his lap. She dropped him at Pickers Lane just after 1 in the morning, waited until his porch light came on, then drove to Delaney Street. Loretta was sitting at the kitchen table with the lights on and 2 cups of coffee made. She looked at her sister's face when Vivery walked through the door and didn't say anything. She just pushed one of the cups across the table. Vivery sat down. The documents were still spread across the table from the days before. Robin's careful handwriting on the folder labels, her own notes in the margins of the legal pad, the whole architecture of everything they had built. The kitchen was the same kitchen where their mother had made breakfast before school every morning for 18 years, where their father had sat with his coffee and his Gulf War silences, where Vivery had studied for the West Point entrance exam by the light of a single lamp because the electricity was unreliable, and she had refused to let that stop her. Loretta looked at her steadily across the table. You could stop, she said. Not a suggestion, not a plea, just an honest accounting of what was possible. I know, Vivery said, but you won't. No. Loretta reached across the table and covered her sister's hand with her own. Then, let's figure out what we haven't used yet. They sat at that kitchen table until past 2 in the morning. Loretta refilled both cups without being asked. The television was off. The house was quiet around them in the way old houses get quiet late at night, settling into itself, creaking softly, like it was breathing. Vivery had her legal pad open. She wasn't writing yet. She was thinking, which for her looked almost identical to doing nothing. Her eyes were steady, and her pen was still, and her mind was moving very fast through everything she knew. She had been fighting defensively. That was the problem. Since the moment Fletcher snapped those handcuffs on her wrists, she had been responding to Melvins's press conference, to the media attacks, to Mossfield's warning, to the lawsuit, to the doctored video, reacting to each thing as it came. That was not how you won. She knew how you won. 14 years and 3 combat deployments had taught her exactly how you won. You stopped reacting to the enemy's movements, and you started dictating the terrain. You identified what you had that they didn't. You found the angle they hadn't protected because they didn't know it existed. She looked at the documents spread across the table. Melvins had political relationships. The mayor, the city council, 30 years of carefully maintained alliances. He had a department full of officers trained to close ranks. He had a media operation willing to run his version of events without asking too many questions. He had a lawsuit designed to drain her resources and shift the story. What did she have? Robin's banker's box, a senator with subpoena power, a documented pattern going back 8 years, and one more thing, something she had not fully thought through until right now, sitting in her mother's kitchen at 2 in the morning with her sister's hand still warm from covering hers. Melvins had filed a lawsuit against her, against a brigadier general in the United States Army. He had, in doing that, made the United States Army his personal adversary. He had handed her an institutional angle she hadn't had before. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. It had never been just about her, Robin had proved that. But now there was a legal framework that could make the Army care about it in a way that Mossfield's carefully worded warnings couldn't survive. She picked up her pen. She wrote 2 words on the legal pad. Service Members Civil Relief Act. She underlined them once. Then she wrote a question beneath them and stared at it for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. It was 2:17 in the morning. She dialed Jackson anyway. He answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was awake. She suspected he hadn't been sleeping either. Vivery. Sebastian, I have a legal question. A pause. At 2 in the morning. Yes? She could hear him shift, sit up straighter. Go ahead. If a civilian law enforcement official were found to have systematically targeted, harassed, and physically abused active duty and retired military personnel on the basis of race, does that rise to the level of a federal civil rights violation under the Service Members Civil Relief Act? Silence. Not the silence of a man who didn't know the answer. The silence of a man who was understanding, very quickly, what she was actually saying. It would, Jackson said slowly, if someone could prove it was a pattern and not isolated incidents. I have a banker's box that proves it's a pattern, Vivori said. 4 veterans, 15 years, documented complaints that were deliberately suppressed by the same chief of police who is now suing me for saying so publicly. She kept her voice level. And I have a senator who sits on the Judiciary Committee and can put all of it in front of a federal judge. The silence this time was longer. He sued you, Jackson said, mostly to himself, like he was still working through the full dimensions of Melvins's mistake. He did. That man sued a brigadier general in the United States Army. He did, Sebastian. Another pause, shorter this time. Vivery. His voice had changed. The careful, measured tone he had used in every conversation since this started. The one that acknowledged her position but kept one eye on the institution, was gone. What replaced it was something older and simpler and considerably more dangerous. I'm going to make some calls. She set the phone down. Across the table, Loretta was watching her with wide eyes. Well, Vivery looked at her sister. Then, for the first time since she had walked out of that police station 4 days ago, she smiled. Not small this time. He made a mistake, she said, and we're going to make sure he knows it. They slept a few hours and started again at dawn. Vivery was back at the kitchen table by 6 o'clock with fresh coffee, and Robin's banker's box open beside her laptop. Loretta had called in to school, personal days, no explanation given, and was on her own phone at the counter, working through a list of names that Vivery had written out the night before. Carlton residents, former neighbors, people who had lived in this town long enough to remember things that never made it into any official report. Harwood's legal staff had been up since before dawn, too. Vivery had sent them a message at 2:30 in the morning, laying out the Service Members Civil Relief Act angle, and by the time she woke up, there were already 3 responses in her inbox: detailed, thorough, and moving fast. These were people who knew how to work a case. They had pulled public court records, municipal archives, and complaint logs from the Carlton Police Department going back 15 years. What they found took the shape of something Vivery had suspected but not yet seen fully assembled. Robin Harold was not the only one. The first name was Sergeant First Class Jerome Dwyer, retired Marine, 64 years old, pulled over on the highway outside Carlton in 2014 while driving to visit his grandson. Told he matched the description of a suspect. Ordered out of the vehicle. When he produced his military ID and discharge papers, the officer, Fletcher, had thrown them back in his face and told him to watch his mouth. Dwyer had filed a complaint. It had been closed within 3 weeks. Insufficient evidence. The second name was a former Navy corpsman named Vincent Parkin, 58. Stopped walking to a pharmacy 2 blocks from his house in 2018. Accused of loitering. Pushed against a wall when he asked for the officer's badge number. The officer was one of Melvins's men, not Fletcher this time, but working the same street, the same neighborhood, the same way. Parkin's complaint had been reviewed by the same internal affairs process. Closed. Insufficient evidence. The third was Army Reserve Staff Sergeant Maggie Fulton, 47 years old. Stopped in her own driveway in 2020. A neighbor had apparently called in a report about a suspicious vehicle. The vehicle was her own car, registered in her name, parked in front of her own house. Fletcher had arrived, refused to accept her explanation, and detained her on the curb for 40 minutes while he ran checks she had already answered. She had recorded part of it on her phone. She had filed a complaint. It had been buried so thoroughly that even the public records request had initially come back empty. Harwood's staff found it misfiled under a different case number. 4 veterans, 3 men, and 1 woman. Ages ranging from 47 to 71. Spanning 15 years. Different streets, different years, different circumstances on the surface. The same officer, the same department, the same chief. The same rubber stamp at the bottom of every complaint. Insufficient evidence. Case closed. Vivery laid the 4 case summaries out on the table in a row. She stood back and looked at them the way she used to look at a map before a mission, taking in the whole shape of it before focusing on any single part. This was not a pattern that had developed by accident. Patterns like this required maintenance. Someone had to keep closing those complaints. Someone had to keep the internal affairs process moving in the same direction every single time. That took deliberate, sustained, institutional effort. That was Melvin's. She called Harwood at 8:15. "We have 4 veterans," Vivery said, without preamble. Documented. 15 years of complaints deliberately suppressed. All military service members. All targeted in the same jurisdiction, by the same department, under the same chief. Harwood was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "That's a pattern," she said. "That's a federal case," Vivery replied. "I'm calling the DOJ Civil Rights Division this morning." Harwood's voice had taken on the particular energy of a woman who had been building toward something for a long time and could finally see the last piece falling into place. Given the systematic targeting of military service members, they have direct federal jurisdiction. "I'll have my office send everything over within the hour." "Send Robin's documents first," Vivery said. "He's been waiting the longest." 3 hours later, a federal marshal walked through the front entrance of the Carlton Police Department and delivered a single envelope to the desk sergeant. The sergeant brought it to Chief Melvins's office without knocking. Melvins opened it, read the header, read it again. United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. Notice of Federal investigation. He stood very still at his desk. Outside his window, Carlton went about its ordinary morning. Cars moving, people walking. The town that had always done what he told it to do, running exactly as it always ran. He set the envelope down on his desk with hands that were not quite steady. The federal investigation changed the temperature of everything. Vivery could feel it from Carlton. It was in the way Harwood's staff communicated. Faster now, more direct. The careful legal hedging replaced by something that moved like momentum. It was in the way the news coverage shifted. The doctored video was still circulating, but now it was being discussed alongside the DOJ announcement. And that context made it look like exactly what it was. A desperate attempt to control a story that was already escaping. It was in the way nobody from the Carlton Police Department was returning calls anymore. 48 hours after the federal envelope landed on Melvins's desk, Jason Lever hired his own attorney. Not the department's attorney, his own. A public defender referral out of Macon who specialized in exactly this kind of case. Officers caught between institutional loyalty and federal exposure, trying to find the door before the building came down on them. The attorney's first call was to Harwood's office. His second call was to the DOJ. His message was simple. His client wanted to cooperate. Vivery was at the kitchen table when Harwood called her with the news. "Lever is talking," Harwood said. Vivery set down her pen. "How much?" "Everything." The deposition took place 2 days later in a federal building in Macon. Vivery wasn't in the room. She didn't need to be. Harwood's lead counsel handled it, and by that evening a sealed copy of the full transcript was in Harwood's office. She called Vivery at 7 o'clock and read the key sections aloud over the phone. Lever's voice, filtered through the transcript, was the voice of a young man who had convinced himself for years that going along with something wasn't the same as doing it. He had been on the force for 4 years before he understood what kind of department he had joined. By then, he told the interviewing attorney, he had already done enough to be afraid. He described Fletcher's practice in plain, specific language. Certain neighborhoods, certain streets, certain times of day when Fletcher knew the residents would be out. Evenings, weekends, early mornings. He would run plates. He would find a pretext or manufacture one. He would make the stop and escalate it as far as the person in front of him allowed him to. He had a phrase he used, Lever said in the transcript. When a stop went the way he wanted it to go, he'd get back in the car and say, "Maintain the peace," like it was something to be proud of. Melvins knew. That was the part Lever said most carefully, most deliberately, like he had been rehearsing the words long before he said them. Melvins had been informed about the pattern of stops. He had reviewed the complaint filings personally. He had made the decision, each time, to close them. Not because the evidence was insufficient. Lever had seen the evidence on Robin Harold's complaint with his own eyes, had seen the photographs, but because closing them was easier than the alternative. He told us once, Lever said, that the complaint system existed to protect the department, not the public. The department. Harwood stopped reading. The line was quiet for a moment. "That's in a federal deposition," Vivery said. "Signed and sealed," Harwood replied. The second piece arrived the following morning. Harwood's office had retained a digital forensics firm to examine the metadata on the doctored version of Mario Lambert's video, the edited clip that had cut out the moment Vivery identified her rank and had spread across the country before anyone could stop it. The forensics report was 12 pages long. Vivery read the summary twice. The file had been edited on a laptop registered to the Carlton Police Department's Public Affairs Unit. The edit had been made 11 hours after Melvins's press conference. The file had been uploaded from an IP address registered to the Carlton municipal government. Melvins's own department had manufactured the false version of events, using public equipment, on public time. That was not just misconduct. That was a federal crime. Vivery called Harwood before she had finished her coffee. "The forensics report," she said. "I've read it," Harwood said. "Send it to the DOJ tonight. Tonight, Senator. Not tomorrow." already drafting the cover letter. A pause. They made one critical mistake. They used their own equipment, Vivory said. People like Melvin's always think they're untouchable, Harwood said. That's always the mistake. Her voice was steady and certain, and carried the weight of someone who had watched the powerful fall before, and knew exactly what that looked like from the inside. It's almost over, General. Vivory looked at Robin's banker's box on the counter. At the 4 case summaries still laid out on the table where she had left them 3 days ago. Send everything to the DOJ tonight, she said again. All of it. The federal marshals arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning. There were 4 of them. They came in 2 unmarked cars that pulled into the Carlton Police Department parking lot without sirens, without spectacle, without any of the noise that Fletcher had used when he pulled into that gas station 2 weeks ago. They parked, they got out, they walked inside with the quiet, unhurried authority of people who had already won before they walked through the door. Mario Lambert was in the parking lot when they arrived. He had gotten a tip the night before from someone who wouldn't give their name. He had driven over before sunrise and waited in his sister's car with a coffee going cold in the cup holder. When the marshals pulled in, he stepped out and raised his phone. This time, he was filming from the other side. Officer Greg Fletcher was brought out through the front entrance in handcuffs at 8:22 in the morning. He was not in uniform. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and dark pants, the clothes of a man who had been called in on short notice. He walked with his jaw set and his eyes forward, the same way he had walked toward Vivory at the gas pump. Like he was trying to look like someone who wasn't afraid. He looked afraid. The charges were read aloud by the lead marshal in the parking lot, clearly and without hurry. Civil rights violations under color of law, obstruction of justice, filing false police reports. The words fell into the morning air one by one. Several officers stood in the department doorway and watched. None of them moved. Mario kept his phone steady. Chief Joey Melvins was not at the department that morning. He had not been in the building since the DOJ envelope arrived on his desk. His resignation letter came through by fax at 9:45. A single page, terse and formal, containing no apology and no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. His attorney released a statement 30 minutes later, calling his client's departure a personal decision made in the best interests of the department and the community. His attorney did not mention the federal indictment that was filed simultaneously with the resignation. Conspiracy to obstruct justice, misuse of public resources. The doctored video, traced by the forensics team to a laptop registered to the Carlton Police Department's Public Affairs Unit, had given the DOJ exactly what they needed to add the second charge. He was photographed by a local journalist leaving his office that afternoon carrying a cardboard box. He was alone. No officers flanked him. No staff saw him out. He walked to his car in the parking lot of the building he had controlled for over 2 decades, put the box in his trunk, and drove away. Mayor Dominic Perkins announced he would not seek re-election that same afternoon. He made the announcement in a prepared statement released through his office. He did not hold a press conference. The statement was 2 paragraphs long. He cited a desire to spend more time with his family. The Carlton City Council voted 4-1 to accept the terms of the federal consent decree the following week. The decree required immediate independent civilian oversight of the department, mandatory retraining across all ranks, and a fully restructured complaint review process that could not be closed by a single signature. A civilian oversight board was established within 30 days. Robin Harold was named a founding member. He called Vivory when he got the letter. She was back in Washington by then, back in uniform, back at her desk at the Pentagon. She answered on the first ring. "They put my name on it," he said. "They did," she said. A long pause. She could hear him breathing slowly on the other end of the line. In, out. The breathing of a man who had carried something heavy for 8 years and was only now beginning to understand that he could set it down. "All right, then," he said quietly. The Army closed Vivary's conduct review 3 days after Melvins's indictment. The DOJ's findings had validated every word of her testimony. Mossfield's office released a brief statement, 2 sentences, confirming the review had been concluded in her favor. Jackson sent a text that she read, standing at her Pentagon desk in the early morning before anyone else arrived. "It's done. The flag is gone. And for what it's worth, I never doubted you for a single day." She read it twice. Then she set her phone down and stood at the window watching the sun come up over the Potomac. The commendation ceremony at Fort Bragg was small, the way she had asked for it to be. A conference room, not a parade ground. 40 people, not 400. Jackson stood at the front. Senator Harwood sat in the front row in a dark suit, as a personal guest, which was not a thing that senators typically did for commendation ceremonies. She had insisted. Robin was in the third row in his pressed suit, and his father's Korea service medal on his lapel. His daughter had driven him up from Carlton that morning. He sat straight in his chair the whole time, the way men of his generation sat when something important was happening, and they wanted their posture to honor it. The commendation was read aloud by Jackson in his low, unhurried voice. It cited Vivary's conduct in bringing a 15-year pattern of civil rights violations against military service members to federal accountability. It cited her testimony before the Senate subcommittee. It cited her refusal to stand down under institutional pressure when standing down would have been easier and safer and almost certainly better for her career. He pinned it himself. His hands were steady, just barely. Afterward, in the small reception outside the conference room, Robin found her standing near the window with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. He took her hand in both of his. His hands were large and warm and slightly rough from years of working. The same hands that had filed that complaint 8 years ago, that had organized those folders, that had held out that banker's box and trusted her to carry it. "Your father would have had something to say about all this," he told her. "He would have," she agreed. "He would have said it took too long." Robin nodded. He looked out the window at the Fort Bragg grounds, the flat Carolina sky, the long, straight roads, the flags standing straight in the morning wind. "It always does," he said. "But you've got a lot of road left, General. A lot of road to make it shorter for the next one." Vivary looked down at the commendation in her hand. The weight of it was small, a piece of metal and ribbon and engraved words. But underneath it was Robin's banker's box. 14 years of refusing to be invisible. 1 week of refusing to be silent. 4 veterans whose names were now in a federal record that could not be buried or stamped closed or misfiled under somebody else's case number. She looked back at Robin. "Yes," she said, "I do. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day."